My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Good morning, you're watching GB News. Coming up on the Political Correction this morning, we're going to get the latest from the G20 summit in Rome, where Prince Charles is currently speaking. We'll be discussing what we can expect from COP26, big climate conference, Boris Johnson putting great faith in it. Plus, in his first interview since he faces the prospect of a 30-day suspension from Parliament after he was found to have breached Commons rules for lobbying, I'll be speaking exclusively to Conservative MP Owen Paterson. All that and much more between now and 12. But first, the news.
Hello, I'm Simon Pusey and this is your news bulletin. The Prime Minister says COP26 will be the world's moment of truth for humanity. Climate change will be addressed on day 2 of the G20 summit in Rome, with Boris Johnson urging countries to do more to cut emissions ahead of talks in Glasgow. World leaders are also expected to endorse a minimum global corporation tax rate of 15%, which was agreed by more than 100 countries earlier this year. The UK, US, France and Germany have also engaged in fresh talks on Iran's nuclear programme, and the G20 also pledged to vaccinate 70% of the world against COVID-19 by the middle of next year. The Prime Minister is also due to speak to the French President about the row over post-Brexit fishing rights. France has threatened to bar UK fishing boats from some ports and tighten customs checks on British lorries if the issue isn't resolved by Tuesday. Boris Johnson says the threats are unjustified and don't appear compatible with the UK-EU trade agreement. JCB has signed a multi-billion-pound deal to buy so-called green hydrogen. The agreement will see the company purchase 10% of hydrogen produced by Australian firm Fortescue Future Industries. Earlier this month, JCB announced it was investing £100 million in zero-emission hydrogen engines to power machinery. South Central Ambulance Service has declared a critical incident due to extreme pressure and an overwhelming volume of calls overnight. The service, which covers Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Hampshire, says staff are working hard to respond to demand, and it's urging people to use it wisely. UK ambulance leaders have described the number of calls in recent weeks as the highest level of emergency activity in history. NHS health teams will visit more than 800 schools across England this week to offer children COVID jabs. Students between 12 and 15 years old will be offered their first dose in the classroom, or parents can book an appointment at a vaccination centre. More than 600,000 children have been jabbed since the rollout was extended to young people at the end of September. The Prime Minister says there's no evidence to indicate a Christmas lockdown is on the cards. Plan B would involve compulsory vaccination passports for nightclubs and major events, a legal requirement to wear face masks in crowded indoor places, and advice to work from home. Boris Johnson says there's currently no reason to take such action. Alec Baldwin has called the moment he accidentally shot and killed a cinematographer a one-in-a-trillion event. It's the first time the actor has spoken publicly since the incident. He refused to speak about the investigation, but says he's in constant contact with Helena Hutchins' family, who are overwhelmed with grief. Baldwin says he doesn't expect production on the film to resume. And nightclubs can reopen in Northern Ireland from midday today for the very first time in 19 months. As coronavirus restrictions ease, patrons will be able to move around hospitality venues and can dance indoors. The Stormont executive has, however, advised venues to introduce entry checks to see proof of vaccination status. We will have a lot more information for you in about an hour's time, but now it's back to the political correction.
Good morning. You're watching GB News. This is The Political Correction, and I'm Nigel Farage.
I'm Gina Davison.
And I'm Marlene Foster.
And we're joined also by Paul Embry from home today. We're here for the next 2 hours to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge of debate. So please, please give us your thoughts, give us your opinions on the big stories of the day. You can tweet at GB News, or, if you prefer, you can email us, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Coming up this hour, it's a tale of two gatherings as the G20 wraps up in Rome. World leaders descend on Glasgow in a bid to come to an agreement in tackling climate change. We'll have all the latest.
Plus, MPs will decide next week whether to impose a 30-day ban on former Minister Owen Paterson after the Common Standards Committee said that Paterson had committed an egregious case of paid advocacy on behalf of two companies. This morning, we'll be speaking to Owen Paterson to hear his side of the story.
And if there's anything we talk about today you want to get involved with, then get in touch. Nigel's already giving you the details, but one more time, gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction.
Right, well, it feels like they've only just arrived today, but we got the G20. As that comes to an end, the circus moves to Glasgow, and it's going to be a very, very big couple of weeks. So Rome, right now, we've got world leaders there, the wealthiest nations in the world, 20 of them, coming together, talking about the global recovery after the pandemic, climate change, and in some ways, a curtain raiser, I think, for what's going to come in Glasgow.
So what exactly has been on the agenda and what has been achieved by the meeting? Well, one thing that's been achieved is that world leaders have backed plans for a minimum global corporation tax rate of 15%.
The G20 has also wanted 70% of the world vaccinated by mid-2022 and aims to set up a pandemic task force.
France has been calling on other nations to be more generous in donating vaccines to poorer countries.
Yeah, and Italy was hoping to secure key climate commitments ahead of COP26. However, no agreement has been made.
So what's your stance on the global minimum corporation tax? Because, you know, for me, one of the best things about leaving the EU was that we would be free to actually set our own tax policy. And now one of the first things we're doing is signing up to a kind of global standard.
Well, it's been a huge issue, of course, with the Republic of Ireland, who had this phenomenal competitive advantage for years. Lots of friends of mine relocated to Dublin, you know, back offices, that kind of thing. And it worked really, really well. And you were pushing hard for this as well, weren't you?
Well, it was a huge advantage to them when they went to America, for example. It opened a lot of doors for them with major investors. And of course, we know that they have Apple and Google in the Republic of Ireland. It's all because of their no tax. And we had said to our own government, this is a real competitive disadvantage to Northern Ireland. What we need actually is to have the same sort of level of corporation tax, because we knew we could beat them on everything else. But in relation to the tax piece, it was very, very difficult. Yeah,
well, Diana, your question is the right one. I mean, what you're seeing in Rome today is globalism. It's a I'm not being, this is not a conspiracy theory, but it's a move in a sense towards global government. Big agreements. The whole point about Brexit, as you say, is being free to make our own decisions. So, yeah, I don't like it at all. I don't really understand why a British government would go along with it. It's because it's Biden really pushing this hard.
Well, it is certainly,
in a big, big way, you know.
Well, for the very latest on this, let's actually cross over live to Rome, where we're joined by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, what's the mood like in Rome at the moment?
Well, I think the mood in many ways is... It's a good question, actually. What's the mood like? I think it's kind of pretty nonplussed, really, in many regards. As you say, there has been that decision on global taxation. Nigel's right in pointing out, very much pushed by President Biden to a large degree. Now, the argument, of course, they would put from it is that when you look at some of these global multinational companies like Google, for example, or Amazon, frankly, they're bigger in many regards than some smaller countries, and that if you want a fair balance across the board, that countries do need to cooperate on taxation together. When it comes to climate change, the other big issue clearly on the agenda today, when I say nonplussed, it's that, you know, they haven't really made substantial progress, but we are at the start of this process, this kind of curtain raiser here in Rome to COP in Glasgow, and those negotiations with the leaders on climate change, carbon emissions will carry on today before most of them actually get on their planes and head to Glasgow later on. And in many regards, it is a really difficult task. You're trying to get nearly 200 countries to agree to things. These negotiations take place in rooms with maybe 300 people there. How do you get 300 people to agree to things? It's incredibly complex, it's incredibly difficult, not helped by the fact that there clearly isn't the same political impetus, I think, from certain countries like Russia, like China, like India, some of the big emitters of carbon. They just are not necessarily on the same page as Western leaders like Emmanuel Macron or Boris Johnson or Joe Biden on this, and it is going to make it tricky. And the key question, and I was putting this to the Prime Minister yesterday, and we can't really get to the bottom of it, is what is the measurement of success in Glasgow, or indeed here in Rome? Where is the bar? How can we, as journalists or indeed as citizens, judge that actually they have made some progress on all of this? Now, Boris Johnson's argument about that, or his point, is that he is trying to keep this idea of maintaining global temperature increases to 1.5 degrees. If that is still an aspiration, then essentially that is a success. But just having an aspiration doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to happen. And you look at one of the other key things that the Prime Minister's been arguing for in the last couple of weeks, that is this idea that he was trying to raise $100 billion from kind of Western wealthy countries that would be transferred to poorer countries to mitigate some of the damages of climate change. That target is not now going to be reached this year. It's been pushed back to 2023. So, as I say, it's difficult to judge these things right now because this is going to go on for the next 2 weeks. Glasgow is not due to wrap up until the 12th of November. It's only then we'll get a proper sense. But at the moment, you know, there's a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk about aspiration, but no real sense of where the detail will be that we can judge that success has been achieved.
Darren, help me, please. I'm curious. Why is the heir to the throne, Prince Charles, in Rome speaking at a G20 event?
Well, he's come here to talk about climate change, and it's something that he feels very passionate about. He's talked in the past, hasn't he, repeatedly. And to be fair to Prince Charles, not just in recent years, but for decades, about the planet and how he feels that humanity is not necessarily having the best impact, that we do need to mitigate some of the damages we're doing. He is here to talk to leaders. I'm sure he's hoping that in many ways his argument, his status may well hold some weight. Though others would point out, Nigel, you know, this is Prince Charles who flew here on a private jet, will then go on to Glasgow on a private jet, as a man possibly has one of the largest carbon emissions individually of anyone on the planet. So, you know, he is making his arguments, trying to convince and cajole people, but at the same time, when it comes to his individual responsibility, you know, it's his position as well. But, you know, he is someone who has contributed an awful lot to climate change in some ways as an individual, more than almost anyone else on the planet.
It's getting quite political, isn't it? That's the point I'm making. That's the point I'm making. There he is with political leaders, and he's urging, in effect, legislative change. And I just wonder whether this is overstepping the mark for the royal family. No doubt a question we'll come back to. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's always really tricky with these things. You know, Prince Charles may well argue, and we're going to hear from him actually later on this morning, that this isn't necessarily political. That actually, in many ways, we should kind of get the politics away from it. He would argue that humanity and the future of our planet genuinely is at stake here, and that action does need to be taken, and that there is large political consensus in all of this. I think the argument he would make is that I think almost every leader around the world accepts climate change is happening, accepts that humanity is contributing towards it. It's just how much you try and mitigate that and at what cost that may well come at. But yes, of course, there will be critics who are suggesting that this is the Earth Throne getting too much involved, though we did hear from the Queen. She was heard making remarks, wasn't she, kind of on a camera microphone a couple of weeks ago, saying that she wanted leaders to do a bit more, or that she wished they would kind of step up to the plate rather than just speaking words. But yeah, these things are always tricky, constitutionally, of course, for our royal family. And the Queen was due to go to Glasgow, of course, to represent Britain. She's not now going to that, and Prince Charles will very much be taking up that mantle.
No.
Well, Darren, thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts, and we will be talking about the Queen a little bit later in the show. But Paul, I'm really keen to come to you on the point about this minimum corporation tax, because I think the intent behind it is to stop some of these global multinationals from being able to kind of exploit different tax regimes. What's your stance? Do you think it's a good thing?
I absolutely do. In principle, it's the right thing, I think, to have a minimum rate. And the truth is that most people, ordinary people, I think, are sick and tired of huge corporations exploiting the current system, moving around the globe in order to avoid paying the right rate of tax. And you know, some of these corporations have made huge amounts of money out of the recent pandemic. You look at Amazon, for example, with the increase in people going online and buying books, etc. It has to be right that we intervene and say, look, you're not going to get away with using loopholes in order to avoid paying your proper rate of tax. Ordinary taxpayers out there, ordinary working class people, are suffering at the moment in terms of the cost of living, in terms of living standards, and they see some of these big corporations getting away with murder. So it's absolutely the right move. My fear, if anything, actually, is that the rate is too low. That actually by saying it's only going to be 15%, you potentially encourage the industrialised economies that currently have a higher rate of tax. I think the average for industrialised economies is about 23.5% for corporation tax. You encourage them actually to cut it back to 15%. While still being able to maintain that they're doing the right thing. So in principle, absolutely the right thing. In practice, it should be higher. And yes, we need to start holding some of these big corporations to account.
Yeah, it doesn't mean they're going to start paying huge sums of tax, because there are all sorts of other loopholes, Paul, that they will exploit, I'm sure.
Well, we go after them then, Nigel. We go after them and we close those loopholes. I mean, if other people, if ordinary working people tried aggressive tax avoidance or even tax evasion to get away with paying a lower rate of tax, then the state would go after them, and we shouldn't be afraid of going after these big corporations either. We shouldn't accept that they have us over a barrel.
Well, Paul, one thing we can do with Brexit is actually we can set our own tax parameters, set our own rules for foreign companies. So this is something actually, if you've got big firms transacting business, large-scale business in this country, we could start to tax them directly. But, you know, that's a debate perhaps for another day, but I understand.
Unless you're in Northern Ireland, of course.
Yeah, well, yes, of course.
Well, we'll come on to Northern Ireland a little bit more later, but first...
Absolutely. We're now going to move on to talk about the UK and France, who have only 2 days left to resolve their increasingly fractious differences over fishing rights before Paris' imposed deadline to introduce port restrictions and border checks. French officials have warned that it will bar UK fishing boats from some ports and tighten customs checks on lorries entering the countries with British goods from Tuesday, unless more licences for small boats to fish in British waters are granted.
The rows threatened to boil over as Brexit Minister Lord Frost accused France of a pattern of behaviour against Britain, with ministers in Paris having previously suggested they may restrict energy supplies to the UK and to Jersey because of the disagreement. Nigel, I'm sure you have strong views on this.
Yeah, well, I was at sea yesterday.
Yeah.
I was at sea yesterday off the South Cornish coast. I was given some footage of a French vessel fishing inside the 6 miles on the 8th of October. and I'm going to package that up and send it to George Eustice and say, what actions are you going to take against that boat? Because, we've got a boat was impounded the other day, yes. As you know, a British boat. Here's the thing. We actually thought with Brexit that we'd get back control of our territorial waters. And in theory we have, but in practice we haven't. And the sheer number of foreign boats that are fishing between our 6 and 12-mile limit is unbelievable. About 97% of applications from EU countries were granted. The only couple of dozen that weren't granted were boats that could show no historical record of fishing close up to Jersey or indeed in parts of the English Channel. Maybe there should be a bigger debate. Why are any of them being allowed in our 12-mile limit? Because environmentally, this is very, very destructive, and I thought this government was green. So I feel quite strongly about it, and I don't know. I mean, I guess Boris's fear is some kind of trade war. Boris's fear will be maybe in the short term they can hurt us more than we can hurt them. I don't know. But I think this is an essential matter of sovereignty. And Jersey, we have got to stand up and protect Jersey. And if there is a big blockade this Tuesday, which is being threatened, let alone a cut in power, this is a big moment for the Prime Minister to be strong and to know that here we've got huge numbers of boats fishing in our waters. And do you know how many British boats fish between the 6 and 12 in France? 1. So the whole thing's a mess, and Boris must stand strong, and I'm sure the party will be right behind him being strong on this.
Yeah, incredibly kind of strong views from myself, from a lot of colleagues on this point of this need to really show strength at this vital moment, because, the French are trying to make out that it's us not kind of sticking to our commitments, but actually, as you rightly said there, Nigel, 98% of the applications have actually been granted, and those that haven't are the boats and are the fishermen who can prove no link, no past history of actually fishing in British waters. So we're actually sticking to our word, we're sticking to our side of the agreement.
Yeah, we're sticking to the deal.
Precisely.
I mean, I actually hate the deal. I think, there were 2 parts of the Brexit deal that were really unsatisfactory, fishing in Northern Ireland. But yes, you're right, we are sticking to that deal. Precisely. And they just want it all.
Yeah, but it's also the language that's been used by the French. Yes. I mean, this is an EU-UK deal, but yet the French are allowed to use language that is quite unbelievable in terms of, you have to meet force, you have to punish the UK for leaving.
Yes.
I mean, you would never hear that in diplomatic services, and yet they're allowed to go ahead and use it.
Extraordinary.
Absolutely not. Well, stay with us, because coming up, the Prime Minister has told the EU that real progress must be made as talks over the Northern Ireland protocols remain in deadlock. We'll have the latest.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christies.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. Time to hear your thoughts and views. And Matthew says, good morning, GB News. Well, I've listened to Prince Charles and had enough of him already. I've got to tell you, Matthew, I feel a bit like this. And I'm really worried. It's all well and good to say that this is a cause that Prince Charles believes in. I know, because I met him face to face in 2007 in the European Parliament when he said the North Pole will be gone within 7 years. And this level of alarmism is one thing, but I think he's dabbling in politics, and I think it's very dangerous for the royal family personally.
Arlene?
OK, and we have Kevin here who's come to comment on the tax story. We'd be interested to see how the UK deals with the minimum 15% tax rate. Most of the world's tax havens are UK dependencies in the Caribbean. Will the UK government encourage these zero-rate low-tax havens to meet this obligation, or will a blind eye be turned? That's an interesting point, actually, about our overseas territory.
Yeah, Cayman Islands and of course, the Channel Islands, too.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Sticking on the tax side there, we've got Lee who said 15% is the minimum and very few countries have a rate lower than that. But we should reinforce this by not allowing any companies registered in a country that has a rate lower than the minimum to trade in the UK. Interesting proposal there from Lee.
Yeah. On climate change, Wendy says, let's get constructive and stop the destruction. Stabilise the patient, as they say when someone arrives in A&E. Stop illegal logging, stop illegal fishing, stop further exploitation of peat bogs, and, of course, plant trees. Wendy, I'm with you. I'd love to hear some more positive talk.
Yes.
We hear so much about cutting emissions, and we're perfectly happy, of course, to import coal and import gas and think we're doing a great job. And there's far too little talked about in terms of the sequestration of carbon dioxide. So, Wendy, I'm with you completely on that.
And just on the G20 again, Alan says, beware all, globe-trotting Greta Thunberg is in town. Hope she will cut down on her carbon footprint. I think she arrived by train, though, to be fair.
I think she did, yeah.
She did, yeah. She didn't fly, although there'll be many, many people flying into Glasgow over the next couple of days.
25,000 of them.
Absolutely. And then one more back on Prince Charles. Lee says, if we did end up having a referendum on net zero, this level of activism from our next monarch will be somewhat constitutionally awkward, to say the least. Well, I pray there is not a referendum on net zero, because we just don't, we don't need it. We don't need another one.
I tell you what was interesting, and that was the polling released this week. So if you ask the public about climate change, do they think it's happening? They say yes. When you ask them, do they want to pay for it?
No, that's right.
They don't want to pay for it. They don't believe in heat pumps. But the figures this week in the Telegraph published showing quite a big majority in favour of a referendum on net zero targets, I thought was really interesting. Really interesting. And I'm not saying, I mean, I've always thought, Diana, that referendums should be more on constitutional issues. But I do wonder whether Westminster isn't getting very out of touch with a large segment of the population.
Well, I think that was the problem with Brexit, and that was shown through the referendum. But, I mean, we don't want to get into a period of rolling referenda on different issues, because I think that would be really problematical. But anyway, we're going to move on and talk about the protocol. We do nearly every week, unfortunately, but Boris Johnson has said that real progress must be achieved soon in the negotiations to find a solution to the issues with the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Downing Street said the Prime Minister told European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen during their meeting on the margins of the G20 that a fix was needed rapidly to prevent further disruption in Northern Ireland. Discussions on the protocol will continue next week, with Mrs Sefcovic, Lord Frost and their teams due to meet in Brussels on Friday.
Well, again, we're back talking about the Northern Ireland Protocol, and we hear language from the Prime Minister about we're going to need to find a solution soon, it has to be dealt with rapidly. But what does that really mean? Because we've been talking about this now for a whole year. We had the command paper in July, which set out very clearly what the UK government felt was needed to happen. Then we had the European Union saying, oh, we didn't realise that you were going to talk about the European Court of Justice. Well, it's in the command paper, so obviously it was going to be talked about. But there's a huge amount to be talked about. There's VAT, there is state aid, there are tariffs, there are trade, and of course we have to talk about the jurisdictional issue, because you cannot have in an international agreement the referee being one of the parties, and that's the fundamental issue.
Yeah, and don't you sense also, Arlene, and you may not want to hear this, but actually sorting out Northern Ireland becomes quite a low priority compared to the problems that we've got with France?
Well, and that's, France has always been part of the difficulties in sorting out the NI protocol. They've always taken a very hawkish view on the issue within the European Union bloc, backing up the Irish government on many, many occasions, and actually going further, actually, on some occasions. So it's almost as if the French have now moved on. They're dealing with the protocol, but they're now using fishing as well. So it's we all know there's a presidential election coming in France, but it is bash the Brits time for the French, and that's what they're doing on the protocol, and they're doing it now on fishing as well.
So, Paul, would you agree with that? Do you think this is some sort of political manoeuvring by Macron, or do you think there's more to it?
Well, I think he's engaging in a bit of shameless posturing and populism, dare I say. The very thing that, he was elected to stand against is exactly what he's doing now. And it is a bit of shameless brick bashing, let's be honest about it. I think it owes more to French internal politics at the moment as much as anything else with the upcoming election, and he's being very belligerent in a number of areas. I mean, he recalled the ambassadors, didn't he, from the US and Australia. He's threatened to cut off Jersey, even stuff around the AstraZeneca vaccine, where he was very bullish on that. So yeah, I mean, I think it's quite clear what his game is. I don't think personally they have a huge amount to complain about in terms of fishing. But there we go. As I say, it's as much to do with French politics and Macron being a temporary populist, shall we say.
The relationship here with the European Union is interesting. Arlene mentioned it earlier. Boris, we're told from today's press reports that Boris is begging the European Commission to somehow intervene. And it does raise some very, very big questions, doesn't it? France seem to do within the European Union what the hell they like as and when it suits them. It is quite extraordinary. Paul, what should Boris do on this? I mean, clearly, Jersey could be the flashpoint for this, and it could come as soon as Tuesday. But in a broader context, how firm do you think Johnson should be in the face of these threats?
I think he should be firm, but I think he should be diplomatic. It's the old saying in politics: never wrestle with a chimney sweep, because if you do, then you end up getting dirty as well. So my advice to him, not that I suspect he will take it, but my advice to him would be: look, keep the language on our side as diplomatic as possible, be as constructive as possible in terms of relations with France, in terms of dialogue, in terms of any negotiations. And if it's Macron's plan, which clearly it is, to ramp up the talk and the bellicosity to appeal to his own internal audience, then that's a matter for him. So tough negotiations, absolutely, but publicly maintain the moral high ground.
Okay, which raises the question: is prenez un grip? I mean, and these sort of phrases, do we class that as diplomatic language, or is it just Boris's humour?
I think it's just Boris's humour. But what I will say is it's not just Macron that's using language that is quite inflammatory. It's his Prime Minister, who, of course, wrote to the European Union. His Europe Minister, who was talking about fighting. It's not a war, it's a fight, and all of this. So, I mean, it's not just people. Some commentators have said, unless and until Macron leaves the Elysee Palace, that the relationships will not improve. Actually, he's not standing alone. There are others in the administration as well, and I think we need to remember that.
Yeah, I think the letter was quite extraordinary, wasn't it? Effectively saying that we need to make an example of Britain and prove that there are massive negatives to leaving the EU. But this is just madness, isn't it? Trying to conflate these two issues, trying to conflate the fact that France is literally punishing us, and then saying that the EU should then use this as an example to try and prevent others from leaving. And we see the rising tension in places like Poland, and also even in Italy, where there is this sort of rising Euroscepticism. So yeah, it's going to be a really interesting one to watch play out, both on the protocol. Arlene, what's your take on Lord Frost? Because he is very firm, he is very strong, but do you think he stays on the right side of diplomacy?
No, I do. I think he is very much poked at times, sometimes by Simon Coveney, sometimes by the French, and he reacts in a very calm, stoic way, if I can say that. But he's been very clear what is needed. And I go back to the command paper again, Deanna. I mean, it's all set out there very clearly as to what's needed to happen to the Northern Ireland Protocol. So when people feign surprise about the European Court of Justice, I have to say it's just a nonsense.
Well, still to come in this hour, I'll be talking to Conservative MP Owen Paterson as he gives his first interview since discovering that he faces the prospect of a 30-day suspension from Parliament after he was found to have breached Commons rules for lobbying.
name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christies.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday right here on GB News for To The Point.
A former cabinet minister will learn next week whether MPs will suspend him from Parliament for 30 days for breaching Commons rules on lobbying. Conservative MP Owen Paterson was found to have repeatedly lobbied ministers and officials on behalf of two companies for which he was acting as a paid consultant. The names of the firms were Randox and Lynn's Country Foods. The Common Standards Committee said Mr Paterson's actions were an egregious breach of the rules on paid advocacy by MPs and recommended he should be suspended for 30 sitting days. But Mr Paterson responded by releasing an angry statement in which he rejected the Commissioner's findings and labelled the process biased and not fair. Well, I'm joined this morning in what is his first broadcast interview since these findings came out earlier in the week by Owen Paterson himself. Good morning, Owen.
Good morning, Nigel.
Let's just, from the top with all of this, you're a member of Parliament. You are allowed to have outside work. You're earning about £100,000 a year from these two consultancies. You're found by the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner to have effectively not just have been an advisor to these companies, but a lobbyist for these companies. Isn't that of itself a breach of parliamentary standards?
Yes, if it was true, but it's not true. I was not lobbying. I was using the exception rule that you can bring a serious wrong to the attention of ministers or government agencies, even if it benefits a person or company you're associated with, if there is a genuine serious wrong. I've never raised these three companies in a question, in a debate, in Westminster Hall, in a statement. I've never been involved in any contracts they've negotiated with any government agency, because that would be improper. I judged on these three issues, they were so serious and lives were at risk, and I was privy to some exceptional information because of the exceptional technology involved. It would have been absolute dereliction of duty if I had not raised those issues with the FSA. So if you take the first two, Randox have exceptional technology. They found out that 12.5% of random milk samples, taken totally at random from British supermarkets, had antibiotics, including fluorphenicol, which is absolutely banned. Not a few parts per billion, 0. It is known to be carcinogenic. And we know that carcinogenic substances and also antimicrobial resistance are issues which the World Health Organization could say will be the biggest killers of human life in decades to come. The chief medical officer at the time said antimicrobial resistance issues were catastrophic. It would have been absolutely wrong, given my own personal background from a farming background, my own background here as a member of Parliament for North Shropshire, one of the biggest milk lakes in Western Europe. A time as a shadow minister, when I travelled the world learning about the dairy industry, and then my 2 years as the deferent Secretary of State, it would have been quite wrong not to have used that knowledge to bring it to the attention of the FSA and to accelerate the story. As a result, that item is now being tested for, and British milk is safer. So this morning, when you put milk into your coffee or onto your cornflakes, you were safer thanks to my efforts. Similarly, on the issue of a carcinogenic product being deliberately targeted at young British children, which Professor Chris Elliott, Britain's leading food expert, said was the worst case of marketing he'd seen in 35 years, that also was resolved. It was brought to the attention of the Irish authorities. They acted very rapidly, and the company involved changed the formulation. So I'm actually very proud of what I've achieved. I find it quite extraordinary that this report has totally failed. It has not interviewed me properly. I produced 17 witnesses who've all corroborated my version of events. And this is a complete denial of natural justice. This inquiry started 2 years ago yesterday. If we said it was yesterday, the first time I talked to the Commissioner for Standards would be the 26th of March, 2023. That's how long ahead it would be if she'd started on this basis yesterday.
And how much time did you spend with Catherine Stone? She was in charge of this inquiry. Did you sit down and make the points to her that you've just made to us about safety?
Connection. Hello?
Hello. I mean, my question was, did you sit down with Catherine Stone face to face and make the points that you've made, that yes, you were a consultant for these companies, but you were, I think we've lost him, which is a terrible bore. Well, I'm sorry about that. We will endeavour to get Owen Paterson back. But either way, you know, what has been laid down?
Can you hear me? I'm back again.
Are you back?
Sorry, I had a phone call.
Fine, right. Take two.
So just very briefly, so this inquiry started 30th of October 2019.
Yep.
You go right round the clock. The first memorandum was produced 6 months after my wife took her own life in December 2020. I'd still not been talked to at that time. On the 2nd of September this year, the Commissioner wrote to the clerk saying she'd already made her mind up before that first memorandum was published. That first memorandum was riddled with factual inaccuracies, some of them quite comical, such as the suggestion I should have met the chief vet. I didn't just meet the chief vet. We had meetings in my office with a whole range of experts across the dairy industry, and we moved on from fluorphenicol to flucosides. And the experts have said, thanks to the result of those meetings, which we grandly call the Milk Quality Forum, British milk is safer. So I'm actually very proud of what we've achieved, and I wouldn't hesitate to do it again tomorrow. The tragedy for me and for my family is that none of this has been properly explored by a proper process. If you look at the ACAS rules, from those basic inspection of an issue in any small business, you immediately have a meeting with the person. Why didn't the Commissioner ring me the afternoon she read the article in the newspaper and said, I don't like the look of this, Mr. Patterson, what is your response? ACAS then goes on to say you have to establish what the terms are, what the criticism is, and both sides can exchange information. It's the most basic fundamental issue. Would be exposed at the beginning. So natural justice does not apply to members of Parliament.
Did you sit down with Catherine Stone face to face and make the points that you've made here this morning?
I did not. I've never met Catherine Stone. Because of COVID, she wouldn't meet me. We didn't meet until the 26th of March this year. So that's 17 months from the time this inquiry was launched. And I did put questions to her. Well, the first question I put was, I spent 25 years in business. I became president of my European Trade Association. I've been in Parliament for 24 years. I've never had an argument with the Fees Office. I've never had an argument with IPSA. I went right through the expenses scandal. unlike senior members of the Standards Committee, I've never had an issue with any of the speakers. And yet I'm treated as a criminal from the beginning. And this is something I find very, very hard to handle, that I'm not treated with the respect of someone who has not broken any rules. It is a very, very difficult experience for me to be condemned from the beginning. And we know now, the Commissioner said she'd made up her mind before she wrote even the first memorandum, and her opinion hasn't changed. And the committee are equally at fault because I offered them in the meeting in September. I had one meeting with the committee and I said, here's the mobile phone. Let's ring these guys up on WhatsApp. There are two obvious witnesses that straddle two of the subjects. Let's ring them up. You ring them. Go on, ring them. And they've not rung a single witness. They've had the details of my witnesses since that call to the Commissioner on the 26th of March. Not one of those witnesses has even had a text. Now, that could not happen in a court of law. My lawyers are emphatic that if we'd suspended parliamentary privilege, we'd gone to a court, a judge would have chucked this out for improper procedure very rapidly. So what is so sickening is there is a procedure. Under standing orders, there should have been an investigatory panel, which there would have been a proper lawyer, a properly trained lawyer, who could have interrogated witnesses.
Oh,
so it's not only
this Wednesday.
Sorry.
This Wednesday, there's going to be a vote in the House of Commons on whether you're going to get a 30-day suspension from Parliament, which is a very, very, very serious sanction. Will you be able to speak in your defence in the House of Commons on Wednesday?
Well, I very much hope so, and I intend to speak. Yeah. And I'm absolutely emphatic. By my actions, British food is safer and lives have been saved. And it would have been an appalling dereliction of my duty, my experience, and my knowledge not to have raised those issues. And as I've said, I would raise them again this morning. I wouldn't hesitate. And what is the point of being an MP if you have that knowledge and you have the privilege? It's a great privilege being MP to be able to bring this to the attention of the right authorities very rapidly. We were really concerned about the milk issue, and we really thought this could make the whole salmonella crisis in the chicken industry look like a jelly puff. It could have really blown it up, but much worse, lives were at risk. There was a moral angle to this. It would have been immoral not to have raised these issues. And none of this has been explored by either the Commissioner or the committee.
You say that it's a great privilege to be an MP, but clearly the MP salary isn't enough for you.
Yes, but I think it's wrong not to allow people to have outside interests. I am handsomely remunerated, you're quite right, as an MP, and by the companies that pay me. But I'm very, very careful to keep the divide. So I stressed earlier, these companies are in daily contact with agencies of the British government. I have nothing to do with that, whatever, absolutely nothing. That would be quite improper. But these issues are being portrayed as selling expeditions, and emphatically they weren't. And the 17 witnesses all confirm my view. So I think it is good that MPs have outside interests. I wouldn't have had knowledge about this technology. I wouldn't have access to this very special information if I hadn't had an outside interest. So I think it is good that MPs do bring knowledge and ideas and new technologies to the attention of Parliament and the public services and bureaucracies. It's very important. These bureaucracies are very stick in the mud. One of the most interesting documents was from the FSA, who, in a private briefing, recommended that we should carry on with the status quo. Now, luckily, the status quo has some very good leaders in Heather Hancock and Tim Bennett. They recognised the seriousness of the situation and took action. But that was shocking. Maintain the status quo, 12.5% of milk with carcinogenic products in from the authority. Now, that is the purpose.
I absolutely hear what you're saying.
Having those contacts. But they have
I hear
to
what
be
you
monitored.
say, but as you know,
there has to be a policing system, but it has to be within the rules of natural justice. And the current
after Cash for Questions
doesn't go near that. Sorry.
After Cash for Questions, after the MP's expenses scandal, you and I both know that the public do not really like MPs having outside earnings at all, and that is a debate I think was going to go on for some years because. Do we pay MPs more? Well, if you ask the public that, they say no. So, I understand the argument you make that having outside interests gives you specialist expertise that you can speak on. and try and improve things. And I get that. I understand that. Do you right here and now think you can win this vote on Wednesday?
Definitely, because I think MPs do have a sense of fairness. And anyone can recognise that if someone is not interviewed, not even met for 17 months after an inquiry is launched, during which time their wife takes their own life because, not entirely, we'll never know entirely why, but the pressures and the manner in which this inquiry was conducted definitely drove Rose to despair because she could see no end solution until I was found out for something, just something, and then I'd be made to resign and she'd have to resign.
So you
but I think MPs do have a sense of fairness. And what we must do on Wednesday is also talk about the future. This system is absolutely broken. And my case is the most shocking example. So I feel I'm speaking for current MPs to whom this could happen and future MPs. My daughter's written a piece in the Sunday Telegraph saying quite clearly she wouldn't go near politics, having been through this very close experience with me. So I feel very strongly no other human
if you're involved in politics,
ever be put through this again.
I know as well as you do, being involved in politics affects everybody around you. There is, no way out of that, and I think it does put people off getting involved. But are you really saying you genuinely believe that this case hanging over you was a direct contributor to the death of your wife, Rose?
Yes, I've said this on many occasions, the manner in which the inquiry is conducted. So I responded to all the questions in very great detail, and I pay tribute to my office staff who've gone through a terrible time as well. Don't forget, they've been very badly affected by this. We went into that in huge detail on the 16th of January this year, and we thought we'd answered it. But the inquiry came back, the commissioner came back with yet more questions, quite a long way away from the original newspaper allegation. And then back again in May with yet more questions, miles away from the original allegations. And that's what drove major element. We'll never know. You have to be very careful talking about this. We'll never know what triggered her decision to end her life. But it is absolutely clear, I'm quite clear, that last weekend she had a real go in the kitchen, saying, when is this going to end? You do realise they're going to find out something. However this goes on, they're somehow going to find something. They're determined to get you on something. And then you'll be forced to resign, and I'll have to resign, and we'll end our lives in humiliation and misery. So the human cost for our family is absolutely catastrophic. Bluntly, the last quarter of my life has been destroyed. And it's all because there's no proper process. This could all have been sorted out in a phone call way back on October the 30th, 2019, or if there'd been a proper exchange of witnesses, it could have been sorted out very quickly after Parliament reconvened. But this has dragged on in a manner which is absolutely shameful. And the whole process brings, I think, the deepest shame on Parliament. So we have a chance on Wednesday, not just to vote on my issue and my report, but we absolutely have to bring in measures to bring in a fair system which respect the rules of natural justice. There has to be an exchange of information between both sides. There have to be proper trained lawyers involved, and witnesses have to be professionally interrogated. None of that has happened in my case. So I'm quite clear, I must be the last case. This must never, ever happen to another human being again. What has happened to me is wicked and shameful.
Owen Paterson, thank you for joining us here on GB News this morning and giving us your side of the story. I wonder, Deanna, I know you're relatively new to Parliament and politics, but he does hit back with some very, very strong points of view, doesn't he, here?
Well, I think it's the point about the process and about fairness and actually clarity in that process as well. I've got a few friends, colleagues who've been kind of under investigation for various things. Most of them have been kind of thrown out. But it's that lack of clarity about how the process is going to work, how long it's going to last, how long, frankly, it's going to sit on your shoulders whilst something like this is being investigated. And Owen's case, the fact that this has been going on for 2 years, when, frankly, it could and should have been sorted out much more quickly. I'm really shocked that none of the witnesses that he provided were actually consulted. And in hearing him today, I think shows that questions definitely do need to be asked about how kind of parliamentary standards procedures are conducted, and that there is some transparency in those procedures. Because, I think, people fall foul of the rules for various reasons, sometimes knowingly, sometimes genuinely not knowingly. And it's right that they're picked up on, but it's also right that people should have, you know, the chance to really defend themselves and to stand up for themselves against any of those allegations. And it sounds to me, hearing from Owen today, that that hasn't been the case at all, which frankly is shocking and shows that we do need to reform this system.
I have to say, I found his interview with you, Nigel, compelling. I think he raises some very, very key issues on due process and natural justice. I think it's incumbent upon Parliament to answer those questions from Owen. But the second thing that I really wanted to reflect upon was his family story and the fact that his daughter has felt strongly enough to write in the Daily Telegraph today about the impact that this has had on families. Those of us involved in politics who choose the life know what we're getting into, but the families are the collateral damage in all of this, and I just think it's a heartbreaking story to listen to this morning.
And I think one of the things that stuck with me as well was his point about his staff.
Yeah.
Because often when MPs are going through things like this or any kind of, I don't know, crisis or scandal or whatever it might be, people kind of think the MP is a sole lightning rod for that, but actually it's not. Our staff are incredible in supporting us through difficult times, through hard times, and they take so much brunt, so much stress, and I think that probably hasn't been at all considered by the parliamentary authorities on this either.
Yeah, I wonder how this will go, Deanna. It's going to be very interesting. But the broader point I was trying to make there was the public don't want MPs to be paid more, and the public don't like MPs having outside interests and outside earnings. Paul, how do we square that circle in your view?
It's difficult, and you know, you can't listen to what Owen Paterson said without having sympathy for his predicament. And you touched, Nigel, in the interview on the Cash for Questions scandal back in the 1990s, and I think that's coloured a lot of the thinking, actually, even to today, where, you know, two Tory MPs effectively accused of taking bribes on behalf of companies that were paying them a lot of money. It strikes me that what Owen Paterson didn't really fall into that category at all. He was raising critical issues of safety. But I guess my point would be, look, in terms of MPs having wider interests, to keep them in touch with the real world, as they often say when they're defending it, it always seems to me that those interests tend to be very well remunerated interests, you know, as directors of important blue chip companies. Why not go and work in a factory for a week? Why not sweep the roads for a week? That would really keep you in touch with the stresses and strains of everyday life for most people. So I'm uncomfortable that these interests seem to be, you know, very handsomely paid the whole time. We do need demarcation, of course, between MPs who are involved in business and also their parliamentary activities. But I have sympathy for the guy. I thought he put quite a compelling case, to be fair.
On the money point, Paul, I mean, you know, there are 651 MPs. You know, an MP's salary is £81,000 a year, which, compared to many jobs, is well paid. However, you know, think what the majority of GPs earn. Think what the majority of headmasters and headmistresses earn. Think what the half a dozen senior officials in every council in the land earn. And you could make an argument that actually there are a lot of people in politics earning a lot less than they would be out in the real world.
But I think that's true. I certainly do think that's true. But I think being a member of Parliament is a great honour and almost should be seen as a vocation. That's not to say, you know, we should pay MPs the minimum wage. Of course not, because it's a difficult job. It's a responsible job. They work hard. But at the same time, you don't want MPs earning a salary that is in a different stratosphere to ordinary working people. One of the crucial things about being an MP, I think, is that you are subject to similar strains and stresses that ordinary people have in their everyday lives. And if you're off earning £300,000 a year for doing that job, then that probably wouldn't apply to you. So I believe they should be well paid, but not to a degree where there becomes a real disconnect with the lives of ordinary people.
Yeah, it really is difficult. I mean, I was one of those people. I went from private business to being an MEP. I earned a lot less money in politics than I would have done outside. And there's more people, I think, in that position than perhaps we give credit for. But there we are. I've no idea. Do you have any sense, Deanna, how this vote might go on Wednesday?
I don't at the moment, no. I think there are colleagues who have an awful lot of sympathy for Owen, but we'll just have to see how it plays out. I don't even know if there'll be a full debate on it or not. Sort of waiting to hear how that'll look on Wednesday, but certainly watch this space, and I'm sure we'll be reporting the results of it here on GB News. Stay with us, because coming up we'll be asking what can really be achieved during the COP26 conference, which gets underway later today in Glasgow.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30 a.m. till 12 p.m. every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Good morning. You're watching GB News. Coming up in the next hour, as world leaders descend on Glasgow for the COP26 climate conference, we'll be asking what can really be achieved. Plus, Conservative MP Andrew Rosendale will be here live in the studio to discuss his work on animal welfare. All this and more between now and 12. But first of all, the news.
Hello, I'm Simon Pusey. This is your news at 11 o'clock. The Prime Minister says COP26 will be the world's moment of truth for humanity. Climate change will be addressed on day 2 of the G20 summit in Rome, with Boris Johnson urging countries to do more to cut emissions ahead of talks in Glasgow. While speaking at the summit, Prince Charles said world leaders need to work towards a more sustainable way of living.
I have listened closely to leaders of many countries, particularly Commonwealth nations, whose communities are some of the most climate vulnerable on this earth. It is also impossible not to hear the despairing voices of young people who see you, ladies and gentlemen, as the stewards of the planet, holding the viability of their future in your hand.
Prince Charles speaking there. Well, world leaders are also expected to endorse a minimum global corporation tax rate of 15%, which was agreed by more than 100 countries earlier this year. The UK, US, France and Germany have also engaged in fresh talks on Iran's nuclear programme. And the G20 has pledged to vaccinate 70% of the world against COVID-19 by the middle of next year. The Prime Minister is also due to speak to the French President about the row over post-Brexit fishing rights. France has threatened to bar UK fishing boats from some ports and tighten customs checks on British lorries if the issue isn't resolved by Tuesday. Boris Johnson says the threats are unjustified and don't appear compatible with the UK-EU trade agreement. JCB has signed a multi-billion-pound deal to buy so-called green hydrogen. The agreement will see the company purchase 10% of hydrogen produced by Australian firm Fortescue Future Industries. Earlier this month, JCB announced it was investing £100 million in zero-emission hydrogen engines to power machinery. 3 people have died and 1 is in a critical condition after a group of paddleboarders got into trouble on a river in Haverfordwest in Wales. 5 people were rescued from the water uninjured. We'll have more news for you on that story in the next hour. South Central Ambulance Service has declared a critical incident due to extreme pressure and an overwhelming volume of calls overnight. The service, which covers Berkshire, Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Hampshire, says staff are working hard to respond to demand and it's urging people to use it wisely. UK ambulance leaders have described the number of calls in recent weeks as the highest level of emergency activity in history. NHS health teams will visit more than 800 schools across England this week to offer children COVID jabs. Students between 12 and 15 years old will be offered their first dose in the classroom, or parents can book an appointment at a vaccination centre. More than 600,000 children have been jabbed since the rollout was extended to young people at the end of September. The Prime Minister says there's no evidence to indicate a Christmas lockdown is on the cards. Plan B would involve compulsory vaccination passports for nightclubs and major events, a legal requirement to wear face masks in crowded indoor places, and the advice to work from home. Boris Johnson says there's currently no reason to take such action. Alec Baldwin has called the moment he accidentally shot and killed a cinematographer as a 1 in a trillion event. It's the first time the actor has spoken publicly since the incident. He refused to speak about the investigation, but says he's in constant contact with Helena Hutchins' family, who are overwhelmed with grief. Baldwin says he doesn't expect production on the film to resume. And nightclubs can reopen in Northern Ireland from midday today for the first time in 19 months. As coronavirus restrictions ease, patrons will be able to move around hospitality venues and can dance indoors. The Stormont executive has, however, advised venues to introduce entry checks to see proof of their vaccination status. Head of the Federation of Small Business, Roger Pollan, says he hopes the checks don't become mandatory.
We need to watch infections and all of the rest of it, and then what effect those infections are having, and whether there's any need to bring in further restrictions. But certainly imposing requirements to show vaccine certificates or other status certification would be quite a big burden to put onto businesses. So if it can be avoided without jeopardising public health, then it would be beneficial to do that.
And you are right up to date. I'll have the latest headlines in half an hour. For now, let's get back to the political correction.
Good morning. You're watching GB News, and this is The Political Correction. I'm Nigel Farage.
I'm Diana Davison.
And I'm Arlene Foster.
And we're also joined by Paul Embry from home. We're here until midday to correct politics and put you back in charge. And we love you commenting, giving us your opinions. We read them out. Some of them even shock us ever so slightly, so please keep them coming in.
Well, coming up this hour, as world leaders descend on Glasgow for the COP26 climate conference, we'll be asking, can anything actually be achieved?
On Wednesday, Chancellor Rishi Sunak delivered his budget, saying the UK economy was entering a new age of optimism. We'll be discussing all of that and his spending plans.
And in our weekly feature, We Work For You, Conservative MP Andrew Rosendale will be joining us live in the studio to talk about his work to improve animal welfare.
Well, if there's anything that we talk about today that you want to get involved with, then please do get in touch via email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. This is The Political Correction. So the Archbishop of Canterbury has said the outcome of COP26 climate summit will be, quote, life or death for millions of people. Justin Welby said the talks, which begin in Glasgow today, are emergency surgery for the world, and leaders must deliver for the whole human family.
Dr Welby, who worked in the oil industry before being ordained, is due to visit the summit on Monday and will meet with groups including young members of the Anglican community and Indigenous people. He warned that radical action is needed, but said there was still time to save the world from, quote, the worst of the catastrophe. This will be the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, and to explain more about it is our political correspondent, Tom Harwood. Tom, how's Glasgow looking?
Tomorrow, the biggest conference of the year kicks off in Glasgow. 30,000 people representing over 200 countries will descend on Scotland's second city for a 2-week-long event. An event designed to facilitate a new global agreement on global warming. In 2015, all 196 countries represented at what was then COP21 in Paris reached an agreement. This was to reach net zero CO2 emissions by the middle of this century, as well as keeping global warming well below 2 degrees and an ambition to keep it under 1.5 degrees. This all became known as the Paris Agreement. Well, COP26 is 5 conferences on from Paris, meaning it's a significant COP, and the UK argues it's time for a new, more ambitious global agreement. Boris Johnson has said he wants to keep 1.5 alive, meaning he wants a hard 1.5 degree limit on global warming to be stronger than a simple ambition. But there are significant hurdles. The leaders of some of the world's biggest polluters are not coming, like Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Both countries will send more junior delegations instead. Similarly, there have been complaints that Glasgow is not ready to hold this mammoth event, with industrial disputes, worries about clogged roads, lack of taxis, and of course the all-too-apparent irony of world leaders jetting thousands of miles to talk about climate and emissions. Protesters in Britain have declared they will make their presence felt at the event too. The Extinction Rebellion group want fossil fuel investment banned immediately, with no transition. Still more campaigners complain that the UK has not done enough, when in reality the UK has reduced carbon emissions by a greater degree than any G20 country since 1990. But what has happened in the past isn't always a good indication of the future. Scandal has dogged this conference. The nuclear industry, vital to any realistic attempt to achieve net zero, has reportedly been banned from exhibiting. That just adds to the woes of some of the world leaders not coming, infrastructure worries, and of course the sad news that on health grounds, Her Majesty the Queen will no longer be making an in-person appearance. However, most world leaders will be there. Among the big names are to be Joe Biden, Justin Trudeau, Emmanuel Macron, and UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres.
Greta, up here!
Also set to be there is activist Greta Thunberg, who is almost guaranteed to say whatever is agreed is not enough. One thing is for certain though, whatever the outcome, there will be some fireworks here in Glasgow over the next 2 weeks, or whatever the slightly less fun, eco-friendly version of a firework display is.
Amazing, isn't it, really? I mean, we've got a Prime Minister who's obsessed with this issue. You know, doesn't want us to open coal mines or gas because we've got to be the lowest carbon emitters, and yet they protest and say he doesn't really do enough. But realistically, on the big picture, folks, is it COP26 or is it FLOP26? And is there really any point in any of this if China aren't there, if Russia aren't there? You know, I do understand the need for us to want to have a cleaner, greener world. I get all of that. But there's constant talk of 1.5 degrees. I don't get this. Am I missing something? They seem to be saying if we do this, the temperature maximum increase will be 1.5 degrees. It's almost like they're playing God to me.
Yeah, and we've heard from the Archbishop of Canterbury today, and we were talking about it in our intro there. And I mean, I'm always very strongly wanting to have a Christian voice in the public square, so I'm sort of conflicted on this because it is important that we hear from those people of faith. But I mean, I do honestly believe that there's been so much controversy around this COP26, and of course, the thing that really nailed it for me is the fact that Her Majesty the Queen's not able to go, because I think she is the reason why a lot of people want to come here. And I don't think we should forget as well that the reason why this is all happening up in Scotland, up in Glasgow, is because of the Union. If it wasn't for the Union, Glasgow would not be hosting the COP26, and I think that's something that Scottish nationalists might want to remember when they're talking about COP26 today.
Well, I want to come back to your point there, Nigel, about kind of what can be achieved. Because, you know, part of me thinks I'm really pleased that the UK is hosting this. I'm really pleased that we're taking a lead on this really important issue, because I think we can all agree that we probably should try and be a bit leaner, a bit greener, try and cut our emissions. It's probably a fundamentally good thing for the environment, but also for the health of our citizens too. So surely it's better for the UK to be taking a lead on this, to be drawing nations together, to be trying to get some kind of agreement. And also, I think you mentioned that China and Russia won't be coming. They are sending delegations. I think we should just make that point. But the fact that their leaders aren't going to be there, do you think that's really going to impact on what happens in China and Russia with regards to their kind of green credentials?
There are lots of environmental problems in the world, but here's the one that really got me, folks. Prince Charles, the video last week that he made with Boris doing bits in it as well, is talking about carbon dioxide as a pollutant. Now, we know there are lots of pollutants out there, and we all want to see cleaner rivers, cleaner seas. I mean, I've always been an environmentalist, always. But to call carbon dioxide a pollutant when actually plants can't exist, won't grow without it, I'm not denying an excess of it may lead to something of a greenhouse effect. It may, I mean, I don't know, but it may lead to warming. But we kind of got ourselves in this space where we're obsessing with carbon dioxide when the world faces many other ecological problems. That's how I feel about it.
And we've got ourselves into a spiral of hyperbole as well. You know, everybody's coming out and wanting to be, if you like, more extreme than the last person that spoke on this, instead of actually looking at what it's supposed to be about, a sustainable future, about having, moving, as Deanna says, to a more environmentally friendly way of doing things, but in a sensible way. And there's been no discussion about the cost of all of this to ordinary people who are going to their work every day. And we're going to talk about the budget later on, but I really do fear in relation to the cost of living at this present moment in time, Nigel.
Well, what they've tried to do is they've tried to create a new narrative. The new narrative is, oh, no, there's going to be a huge economic boom because of all the wind turbines we're going to build and all the rest of it. And I don't buy it one little bit. Paul, a lot of jobs have been lost already in heavy manufacturing, engineering, these kind of sectors. And it's pretty clear, isn't it, with whatever Boris Johnson's plans are for this country, that those on lower pay, proportionately, are going to be the ones paying for all this.
Yeah, I think that's pretty evident, and I think there's a distinct lack of honesty around the whole debate, and I think there has been for some time. You know, you can have very high-minded policies like net zero, but unless you have a plan in place for getting there and for making sure that you safeguard people's jobs and people's prosperity so far as they have any, and safeguard communities from devastation, then it's not really going to amount to much. I mean, we remember back in the mid-80s when a huge number of pits were closed in Britain, and there was no plan in place for those thousands, tens of thousands of men who were slung onto the scrap heap, and communities really were devastated. And in many of those places, they're still experiencing the legacy of that. So yes, we do want to live in a cleaner and greener world, but you have to have a plan in place. And there are thousands of people working in industries at the moment whose jobs may potentially disappear. And you know, it is true that it is working class people, I think, who are going to pay the price of it in terms of the expense of electric cars, in terms of the expense of heat pumps, etc. And also, you know, the people who might suffer if the lights go out, if they can't afford to heat their homes and so on. So I think we've got into a mess in this debate. I think we phased out coal far too quickly. We haven't been out of the blocks quick enough in terms of nuclear. And I think there's a whole host of problems that we're now going to confront because we've left it too late and have not been honest in the debate.
I think my view, though, is that surely it's better for Britain to be leading the way in terms of this technology as well, because we have got an incredible science and R&D and tech sector in this country. We're putting an awful lot more investment into it in the budget, which I know we're going to be discussing later. And if we can become world leaders in these green technologies, and if these green technologies are going to be adopted all over the world, then it could see some massive job growth. It could lead to massive job growth. It could lead to a huge economic boom for Britain. I think, you know, we need to be definitely mindful of that fact as well. And just on your point there about kind of retraining, Paul, which I think was a massive failure actually of the government when the pits were closed and when various other sectors were lost. I think this government is much more committed to skills now in a way that we probably haven't seen in a while in the past. You know, the lifetime skills guarantee and much more money going into adult education, so that when people are going from different careers to different careers, there are more opportunities there for them to actually get that training. So I just kind of want to get that on record a bit, just to bounce back at your narrative that we're not doing anything on that.
The trouble is, Deanna, we hear this from every government year after year after year. If it really is happening, then it's fantastic.
It is happening.
But we'll see. Anyway, COP26 will be dominating everything for the next couple of weeks. You'll be seeing Prince Charles on your screens endlessly, I'm certain. Well, one person who won't be attending, though, is, of course, Her Majesty the Queen. He was advised last week by her doctors to avoid the summit and to rest. It's since been revealed that doctors have now told her to rest for at least 2 weeks. It's understood Remembrance Day is likely to be her next public engagement.
Tomorrow evening, the Prime Minister will host a reception to welcome world leaders to Glasgow, alongside the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge and the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall. The Queen will address the delegates in a pre-recorded video, but sadly won't be there in person. What was your guys' reaction when we heard the news that the Queen was asked not to go to Northern Ireland to sort of rest? Because I think for me it was an instant sort of fear, you know. I mean, the Queen has been such a central part of all of our lives for so long, but to think that she wasn't well, I think was quite scary.
Well, I think initially some people thought she was pulling a sickie because of the fact that it was quite a contentious service in Armagh because, as you know, the President of the Republic of Ireland had decided he wasn't going to go and mark the centenary of Northern Ireland, and Her Majesty the Queen was still supposed to be coming. I was quite alarmed to hear that she wasn't coming because knowing how seriously she takes her public duties, it would have taken something to stop her from coming to Northern Ireland. She hasn't been to Northern Ireland for a couple of years now, and of course everybody was looking forward to seeing her. So I was quite alarmed, and then of course it came out that she'd been to hospital for a night for tests and what have you. Look, we've all lived in the Elizabethan age. None of us want it to come to an end, certainly not. We want it to keep going because she has been such an incredible figure in the history of the United Kingdom and indeed the world. And we just want her to keep going. But she is, after all, 95 years of age.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we don't know the truth, do we, Deanna?
No.
I mean, you know, the palace are not going to tell us if she really was ill. I'm not sure they'd tell us anyway. We just don't know. But she's been very, very good, hasn't she, at keeping out of politics. And you get the odd comment she's overheard from saying, but she keeps out of politics. And my worry is that, you know, even Camilla was this week speaking at a big event about domestic abuse. And I'm not saying these aren't important issues, and that we know that Charles, as we've discussed already, thinks, you know, there's a climate catastrophe happening, the North Pole's going to be gone very soon, etc. But it really worries me that if suddenly we have a politicised royal family, I think that could, within a few years, provoke a very different debate in this country about the monarchy itself.
You may well be right.
I genuinely do.
Yeah. Well, I suppose all our thoughts are with Her Majesty the Queen for a speedy recovery. And of course, we want to see her at the Remembrance events on Remembrance Day in a few weeks' time. Stay with us, because coming up in our feature, We Work For You, Conservative MP Andrew Rosendale will be joining us live in the studio to talk about his work on advancing animal welfare.
With heavy rain clearing to blustery showers. Those blustery showers will already be into southwest England, and some of these could be heavy with a risk of hail and thunder. Very windy with coastal gales, especially further west. The back edge of this morning's heavy rain should clear through London, with brighter skies soon developing. Temperatures around 13 degrees at midday. Lots of blustery showers, heavy at times, will be packing into South Wales by lunchtime. For the Midlands, the morning rain should have cleared and will be in the drier, sunnier slot ahead of the showers feeding in from the west later. Temperatures at lunchtime around 12 Celsius. It'll still be raining across a good part of northeast England at lunchtime, but brighter skies shouldn't be too far away. In the short term, though, watch out for some heavy rain and gusty winds, and it's certainly a wet picture across most of southern and central Scotland. We'll see some heavy and persistent rain, especially over east-facing hills, accompanied by strong and gusty winds. Some showers due in Northern Ireland. Winds will be light with temperatures of 10 or 11 Celsius. Moving into the afternoon, and it will remain wet across northern Scotland, otherwise sunshine and blustery showers, and very windy, especially in the southwest.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories. with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christies.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, for To The Point.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me live from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday. Your weekend starts here. My show exists to do three things: to inform, to debate and to entertain. Big guests, big stories and big opinions. And I can't do any of it without you. It's lively and it's a little bit funny. So join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. Welcome back to the Political Correction. Time to hear your thoughts with some GB views. And Janet says, it seems Boris is focusing his time and reputation on the world stage and the green agenda. But we still haven't got the Brexit we voted for. Boris should remember who voted for him and why.
Well, I think Linda largely agrees. Why are we still being ruled by the ECJ and the ECHR? Brexit was supposed to get us out.
Yes, and Peter. Yeah, and I could talk about that.
Something to say about
I could talk about that for quite a while, but I won't. Peter thinks, will there be protests around the government's headlong push to cripple the country over climate change? Would such events be even reported in the media? Well, if they happen, they'll certainly be reported here in GB News.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's one of the problems, isn't it? You don't get much balance in the whole climate change debate because the legislation, the specific legislation that set up Ofcom says you don't need to have balance because this is a settled issue.
Yep.
George wants to know, the panel dismiss what they call rolling referenda, but how do you get the message across there that Westminster are out of touch when every major party ignores the public? I have to say, I wasn't going to have a punch-up with Diana over this, but I am moving...
I'm ready.
I'm moving rapidly towards the Swiss way of doing things, where they can demand a referendum on a national issue. And very interestingly, on the 28th of November, the Swiss are having a national binding referendum on whether they're going to introduce vaccine passports.
Oh, that is interesting.
And I think it is interesting, and I just feel our first past the post system, our politics is out of touch with people. We saw that with the Brexit referendum, but I think it is on many other issues too.
Well, Tony's with you because Tony quips, I'm all for a referendum on net zero. See you on the stump. There we go.
Yeah. And the referendum idea is gaining momentum, Joanne tells us. As all political parties have signed up to net zero, we cannot vote against it. Therefore, we need a referendum on net zero, as it will alter our lives in very fundamental ways. So I think people are clutching onto this, that the politicians are out of touch and aren't listening to what's going on.
I think people just realise the magnitude of what's been taken on here, and it's all talked about very glibly, and it's all going to be fine, and I don't know. Right, let's crack on, I think.
I think so, but keep your views coming in. We've got plenty here, but keep sending them in to us. Now, we often see a lot of negative news about politics and politicians, but here at GB News, we want to shed light on some of the positive work being done by our MPs and other politicians. Last week, we spoke to Carolyn Harris, MP for Swansea East, about her campaign, The Menopause Revolution. And just to update you, Carolyn introduced her private members bill on Friday to cross-party support, with the government committing to reducing the cost of hormone replacement therapy and to establishing a menopause task force with Carolyn serving as a co-chair, which I think we can all agree is a fantastic victory for a fantastic campaigner. But on Friday, another private member's bill was debated on animal welfare, which leads us neatly to this week's MP. Elected in 2001 in Romford and having famously campaigned with his staffy Spike, wearing a Union Jack waistcoat, this MP has a proud track record of campaigning on animal welfare issues. In 2007, he was made a Shadow Home Office Minister with specific responsibilities for animal welfare. And as a backbencher, he's introduced a number of pieces of legislation, including Jasmine's Law to allow more pets in lets and make it easier for renters to take their pets from accommodation to accommodation. And on Friday, he successfully introduced a private member's bill to introduce fines for acts of animal cruelty, ending a loophole in current legislation. This week, our guest is Andrew Rosendale, and we are delighted to be joined in the studio by him. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
So, how much do you love animals?
Animals are part of my life. They're part of all of our lives. I think most people love animals, and we are definitely a nation of animal lovers. I don't understand why anyone would want to be cruel to a living creature. I think we have a responsibility to look after them, to care for them. They are very special in many people's lives, and we really need laws that are effective. And now we're out of the EU, believe it or not, we can actually bring in our own laws, which means that animal welfare can be even better than what it used to be.
No, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah. I was with somebody on Thursday, old boy, nearly 80, and he'd bought a black lab, 18 months old. He put it in the back of a car, state car, gone to talk to somebody, turned around, stolen. I believe there've been something like 3 million new pets that families have taken in over the course of lockdown. So we're talking about over the last couple of years. And of course, the price of puppies has just completely. I got in well with my black lab. I mean, I got it about 4 times the price now, I think. Yeah. But this question of pet theft, is any real action being taken on it, Andrew?
Yes, there is. I mean, my bill doesn't really cover pet theft particularly. No. It's about penalties for those who abuse animals or they neglect them. But there is other legislation. I think one of my other colleagues has put a bill forward on that. But really, it is a serious issue, and particularly due to lockdown, because so many people actually acquired animals. So a dog is for life, not just for lockdowns.
Quite right.
So I think that it's important we have laws that ensure that when people go back to normal life again, they don't just forget the animals that they've acquired. And you do need sensible legislation. And at the moment, there's big holes. So you can either take people to court and prosecute them, or you just give them a written warning. So my bill actually brings in something in between, where there can be penalty notices for minor offences or neglect which wasn't intentional. So you need some kind of way of guiding people to ensure that the animals in their care are properly looked after.
And let's just talk about Friday, because you introduced your bill in a private member's bill on Friday afternoon, and it was met with huge support from right across the House, wasn't it?
It certainly was, yes. And I think it's tinged because of the terrible murder of Sir David.
Absolutely.
Because he was such an animal welfare champion, a great friend of mine, and we worked together on animal issues. So everyone paid tribute to Sir David. So I really dedicate the bill that I'm putting forward to him. And it goes on top of Vivian winning the Westminster Dog of the Year.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about Westminster Dog of the Year, because you actually presented Vivian, didn't you, at the awards? And tell us about that. I mean, she must be the most popular and the most well-known dog in Westminster at the moment.
Well, it was amazing because a lot of MPs withdrew their dogs, or they told people to vote for Vivian and not their dog that they were entering. But no, it was an honour to be asked by David's family to take Vivian. Together with Mark Francois, the MP for Rayling Wickford, we took Vivian in together. And she was the star of the show, no doubt about that. And rightly, she was crowned Westminster Dog of the Year. I think it was online vote, and she got tens of thousands more votes than any other dog. So I think it was a fitting tribute to our wonderful friend David.
Quite right. And I just want to talk a little bit about your campaigning days, because you tend to take pets out with you. And I want to talk about Spike, because Spike went out with you in 2001 and actually met a pretty famous person while he was out campaigning.
Yes, well, I had 2 Staffordshire Bull Terriers, Spike and Buster. And sadly, they're not here anymore, but they both wore Union Jack.
We can see Spike on screen now.
There's
there we
Spike
go.
on there. And they both met Mrs Thatcher. So Mrs Thatcher came twice to Romford to campaign for me, once in 2001 and again in 2005, and both occasions she was very pleased to meet Spike and then Buster, and she was a great animal lover too. She was, and I remember going to see her, and she had a cat which she adored. So she loved animals, but I think who can not love animals? You know, they're a privilege really to have, and I just think that everyone should ensure that if you have an animal, you're responsible, you give it the attention it needs, and you make sure that it's looked after in the way that you would want to be looked after. You know, at the end of the day, they're there for us, and we have to be there for them as well.
Absolutely. And final question, what happens next with your bill? Because it's past the second reading stage, what happens now?
Well, it's brilliant because it's gone through second reading in the House of Commons as a private member's bill. So that's the really big hurdle. It wasn't talked out, or we didn't lose time, and actually gone through, and thanks for being there and supporting me on Friday.
Very happy to.
So next stage is committee stage. So we have to appoint a committee to go through the clauses of the bill. That's when we can extend it or amend it and toughen it up or whatever we want to do. Then it comes back for third reading, which should be a formality. Then, of course, it goes to the Lords. And if it goes smoothly through the Lords, then it will come back to the Commons and hopefully get royal assent. So I've got a real chance, I hope, fingers crossed, of getting this legislation through.
Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today and for all your fantastic work on animal welfare.
Thank
Keep
you
it
very
up,
much.
and
I
in any
will.
way I can
Thank you.
support, do let me know.
Great to see you this morning.
Coming up, we'll be looking back to Wednesday's budget. But first, here's the latest news headlines.
Hello, I'm Simon Pusey. Here are the latest news headlines. The Prime Minister says COP26 will be the world's moment of truth for humanity. Climate change will be addressed on day 2 of the G20 summit in Rome, with Boris Johnson urging countries to do more to cut emissions ahead of talks in Glasgow. World leaders are also expected to endorse a minimum global corporation tax rate of 15%, which was agreed by more than 100 countries earlier this year. And the G20 has pledged to vaccinate 70% of the world against COVID-19 by the middle of next year. Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron have agreed to work towards de-escalating the fishing row. A French official says Mr Macron told the British Prime Minister that he wants the UK to respect the rules. They're due to have further talks in the coming hours. JCB has signed a multi-billion-pound deal to buy so-called green hydrogen. Under the agreement, the company will purchase 10% of hydrogen produced by Australian firm Fortescue Future Industries. Alec Baldwin has spoken publicly for the first time about the shooting death of the cinematographer Helena Hutchins, describing the accident as one in a trillion event. He refused to speak about the investigation, but says he's in constant contact with her family, who are overwhelmed with grief. He doesn't expect the production on the film to resume. You're up to date. I'll have more news on all of today's main stories at the top of the hour.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for the political correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is the political correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, for To The Point.
Welcome back to the Political Correction. Now, time to hear some of your thoughts. And we've talked a fair bit about fishing and the European Union and the Northern Ireland Protocol. And Godfrey says the corrupt history of the EU in full this week as they remain silent on Macron's indefensible outbursts on fishing. The EU ignores rule-breaking by certain members, but allows ECJ fines to go to the others. And Godfrey, I think you make a very, very sound point there.
Well, Ivan here wonders, would the deliberate action of cutting power to the Channel Islands be a crime against humanity, or at the very least a denial of human rights? Surely the EU would consider it a criminal act.
Well, it's certainly a bullying act on a very small part of the world, and it really is very dreadful. Alan tells us, I suggest we source as much as we can from Portugal, Spain, Italy, Holland, etc., and use ports in Portugal, Spain, Belgium and Germany. It will cost a bit more in transport, but let's see how Macron reacts.
Yeah, I mean, there is an argument there, isn't there? The massive over-reliance on the Dover-Calais route.
Absolutely.
Massive over-reliance. I mean, huge pressure on the M20 every time there's a problem of any kind, whether it's French fishermen or, you know, or bad weather or whatever it can be. We get these massive tailbacks on the M20. And there are lots of ports in other parts of Europe, actually, who'd be desperate for the business.
Well, very true. And a good way to show our links with other nations, not just our immediate neighbour as well.
Exactly right.
So we're going to move on now, because each week we aim to talk to someone at the heart of the community to talk about what brings us together, our common ground.
Well, this week we are delighted to be joined by Adam May from the Neighbourhood Prayer Network. Adam, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning. It's good to be back with you.
Yeah, well, we're very grateful to you for coming on. So I understand initially you want to talk to us about loneliness.
I do, because in a week where there's lots of stuff in the news about COP and lots of other things, actually, I think this story from earlier in the week, I've picked a story which highlights what somebody's been doing at a local level. And as a Christian leader that supports Christians working at the local level, this gladdens my heart. But it does speak into a wider crisis around loneliness. So the story that I want to bring you is of Sam Pritchard, who created this campaign in her Lancashire community called Cards Against Loneliness. And it's helped by younger people writing to elderly residents who live in that community to try and not make them feel lonely. And I bring this story this morning because actually there was some research done by the NHS that say that over 2 million older people live alone. Now that is really tragic, but also what's really tragic is this statistic which I saw this week, which I think we haven't been talking enough about in the news, and it's some research that's been done by the University of Sheffield, and the University of Sheffield this week produced some research that suggested that 3.7 million adults in the UK, not just elderly people, not just older people, but just adults in general, say that they are often or always lonely. And so as somebody who is speaking from the Christian community, I want to say that actually we need to kind of be saddened and ashamed by the fact that that is the statistic in modern Britain, that is the statistic, that 3.7 million people in this country say that they feel often or always lonely. And I put this into some kind of context this morning for us because the Archbishops of Canterbury and York have commissioned a piece of work to be done, which is called Reimagining Care. And this commission is about trying to say, look, what can we do to support people when it comes to care? And actually, I think for me, as I read this report, one of the things that I would want to be saying to the archbishops and those that are working on this Reimagining Care Commission is actually, we need to think about loneliness as part of that commission. And I hope that the archbishops, if they're watching, may well take heed of that. But also the fact that, bit like this story from Sam in Lancashire that actually all of us would think about how we can get involved with supporting people at the grassroots level. Actually, our streets and our communities are really important. And that's why, in the midst of all of the news this morning, this is why this was the first story that I wanted to bring you as we think about our common ground this week.
Well, a really positive one, Adam, and I think you're right. It is incumbent on all of us to help out our own communities, isn't it? And if we see people or individuals who we think might be suffering from loneliness, to play our part in really helping them. I understand the second thing you want to... Sorry, Adam, over to you.
No, I was just going to say, in that, actually, I think sometimes we walk around our communities with our eyes closed and we don't look and see actually what's going on in our own community, you know. And so we need to be those that do step up. And I hope that just by flagging up this story of loneliness, that actually we might start to think about actually what can we do. You're right, Deanna. My second story that I want to bring you comes with the title, Work Train Journeys Are Fewer Than They Were Before the Pandemic. Many of my colleagues who I work with across the church in the UK often say to me that they think that I'm married to this chair. Every time they see me, I'm sat here. So it was really interesting this week because I had my first overnight in London Thursday into Friday. And it was interesting to see that commuter trains are still relatively quiet. And it's interesting to see that this report is suggesting that many people, despite the call that said that many of us are being called to go back into the workplaces, many of us are still staying at home. It's interesting that this report from the rail delivery group suggests that, yes, 90% of us may well be using trains and stuff to go out for our leisure, but we're certainly not using them for going back to work. And so it just made me wonder as I read this story whether there is now no going back. That whole thing of it doesn't matter how many messages that we get given to us say, come back to the office. People clearly are not heeding that warning. And maybe many more of my colleagues are going to still see me continuously sitting in this chair. And I speak as somebody who, because of the work that I do, working with a range of different Christian organisations, would travel thousands of miles every single year. And I just see, as I start to go back to travel, very few people on those commuter trains. I don't know whether you'd agree with me on that, whether you see the commuter trains as being quieter.
This work from home thing, I mean, it's becoming, well, to begin with, a lot of the civil service and public sector are just not back in London in significant numbers. So I think certainly with the public sector, you're absolutely right. I think with the private sector, we are seeing, whether it lasts or not, I don't know, but we're seeing private companies, and I'm talking London here, but I'm sure the same would apply in Birmingham or wherever else we went, who are kind of saying to people, we only want you 3 days a week or 4 days a week in the office. Now, whether in a year's time or 2 years' time, companies take that same view, I don't know.
Yes.
Ultimately, it'll be how they judge the productivity of their workers. Yeah. And this is where the big debate, I think, around working from home is. But you're certainly right. Trains, just the streets, it's not as busy or anything like as busy as it was 2 years ago.
And it shows, you know, the incredible power of the internet, which I think brings us on to your third story, doesn't it there, Adam, around people meeting and dating through kind of online apps and online dating apps and things.
Yeah, this story is actually in today's Daily Mail, and I spotted it because as somebody who this maybe let you kind of see behind the kind of closed door, sometimes there's a real pressure on Christians, particularly to marry younger, you know, to marry literally as soon as you finish university. And I didn't. So whenever we look at the kind of changing patterns of what happens around marriage and relationships, it always gets me to kind of sit up and read. And this piece of research that's in the Daily Mail this morning from the Marriage Foundation suggests that married couples who meet online are 6 times more likely to divorce in the first 3 years than those who've met through friends or family members, because the report suggests that there is actually a kind of sense of social capital. Actually, when we meet with people, we maybe tell more of the truth. We can be more honest and real about the things that are interesting us, the things that might make us stay together. rather than, as I say, sometimes those fake dating profiles where, you know, I have friends who tell me stories of the fact that they've used these dating apps, and when they've met the person from the dating app, it looks nothing like the person that they thought they were going to meet. And so it's really interesting that this report suggests that although relationships from dating apps are leading to marriage, and that's a positive thing, that people are still marrying, it is sad that on the flip side of that, those couples do not seem to be staying together. Although the comment from Henry Benson from the Marriage Foundation, who's the director there, still said, though, we can't do away with the fact that dating apps have and are changing the way in which we date.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's absolutely right. Gosh, certainly sort of amongst the younger generations, it's the first port of call these days to meeting someone, isn't it, on a dating app rather than kind of down the pub or anything along those lines. But Adam, thank you so much for joining us this morning and for sharing your stories and proving we do have some common ground.
Boris Johnson has said he remains a low-tax Tory. Yes, really, despite seeing the tax burden rise to the highest level for 70 years. Following Chancellor Rishi Sunak's budget on Wednesday, analysts said the tax burden on the country was at a level not seen since Clement Attlee's Labour government in the early 1950s.
And the increases have caused dismay amongst many Conservative MPs at a time when rising prices have left many families facing a potential cost of living squeeze. And this is what we were talking about earlier, this cost of living squeeze. And I thought it was very interesting that 4 of our mortgage providers put up the price of their mortgages literally within hours of the budget. So, I mean, we're seeing mortgages going up, we're seeing inflation going up. And what impact is that going to have on the middle ground, Nigel? That's a really big issue.
It's very interesting. I mean, I don't want leaders who are miserable and pessimistic. Yeah. You know, I remember seeing Gordon Brown thinking, goodness gracious me, I mean, this is terrible, you know. He always looks so sad. And I like optimism, but I don't like this false boosterism that we get from this government. And, you know, Sunak talked about this new age of optimism. Well, that's great, but the reality, actually, for people on average incomes, or even those on above average incomes, is life is getting very, very tough and very tight. The cost of living is rising. The official inflation figure is rising. Energy bills are going through the roof. And it would appear there's no stopping the boom in commodity prices, whether it's oil or copper or whatever else it is, everything's going to cost more. And I felt, I mean, Rishi is very, very good at presenting. There's no two ways about that. You know, in terms of style, it's very professional. He's very in control. But I felt he was slightly tone deaf in the budget, just to the economic expectations of millions of people out there for whom at the moment it's not optimism. They perhaps could have done with a bit of reassurance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a pretty good budget in many regards, but I think one of those aspects of the cost of living that is really going to hit people from April is this thing around national insurance rise. Yeah. I did vote against it in Parliament, which hasn't made me the most popular among some of my colleagues. But I think that
good Labour budget, though, wasn't it? I mean, that was a Gordon Brown budget, wasn't it? I'm sure Paul will agree. I mean, that was a 2008-9 Labour budget, tax and spend, wasn't it?
Well, there was certainly
it was probably closer to a Labour budget than I guess most other Tory budgets. Yeah. It was probably a better Tory budget, I think, than most other Tory budgets that I've seen. I welcome some of the extra spending. I mean, it does beg the question, if Rishi Sunak is saying, you know, there's an end to austerity now, we're going to raise the limit on departmental spending. If he's saying that with a deficit of, you know, 300 billion or whatever it is now, it begs the question, was the last 10 years of austerity with a lower deficit than that really necessary? I would argue, I always argued, many people on the left argued that it wasn't, and that almost proved the point. I mean, I guess my concern with it is, well, I've got a lot of concerns with it, but one of the concerns with it is he talks very much about high wage, high productivity economy, but didn't really seem to have any plan to bring that about. There's no kind of industrial strategy. There's no strategy in terms of improving our competitiveness, in increasing investment and that kind of thing. I'm slightly worried that we will see a rise in interest rates at some point by the Bank of England, which has got the danger, I think, of choking off any growth. So it was better than most Tory budgets, but still not good enough.
I'm going to have to pick you up a bit, Paul, on the fact you said there's kind of no plan for this kind of high wage, high productivity economy. But actually there is. I mean, we saw the incredible announcements on research and development spending, on kind of scientific investment. I mean, that really does have the power to potentially revolutionise our economy if it's done right. And we've seen more dedication and commitment to that than we have in budgets in decades, I'd argue.
I think the truth is, in terms of R&D and in terms of research, yes, government can help a bit, but actually the vast bulk of the money needs to come from private investors.
Well, quite right. And the government's doing that through the tax regime, through research and development tax credits.
I don't mind the government being positive about those things, absolutely. But it's worth bearing in mind that even with the most ridiculous growth forecasts, and by the way, this whole budget was based on a fable. And the fable was that economic growth this year will be 6.5%, not 4.5%. I don't believe it. And I think if you look at retail sales and many other measures, I just think it's based on a fable. But even with those numbers, borrowing next year for the government is going to be a further 100 billion. That's next year.
Yeah.
So we are building up this huge, vast national debt. It's over 3 times what it was in 2010. And if we do get at some point a rising interest rate environment, we'll find that our national debt repayments every year, well, already they're as big as the defence budget. 2 or 3 more rises in rates, and it becomes as big as the education budget.
Well, that's the reality about running a long-term deficit, though, isn't it? I mean, the debt continues to climb, and those repayments continue to climb, and that's part of the problem, Paul, and that is part of the reason why between sort of 2010 to 2016, 17, that's why this austerity agenda was running, to try and get that deficit down, so that actually
but it didn't.
The government... there was progress towards it. There certainly was progress towards it.
The annual deficit got smaller. Absolutely. But the national debt rose every single year.
The deficit got smaller. Of course, if you've got a deficit, then by default your debt is rising. But the plan was to get that deficit actually into a surplus so that the debt would start to fall. Well, we did have a slight distraction of something that you might remember, Brexit. I don't know if you recall that slightly took up all the oxygen in the political room.
I can assure you it was never going to happen anyway.
But I just want to talk about a couple of positive things. I'm very pleased to see domestic air passenger duty for the first time being tackled.
Absolutely.
I know that some people on the climate change agenda will not welcome that, but for those of us who live in Northern Ireland, and can I say to Ed Miliband, who this morning has said we should try and cut down the number of flights domestically, don't forget about the people in Northern Ireland. We need to be able to get backwards and forwards, and I think that that's a really welcome thing. And I say that for those of us who live in Northern Ireland, but also for the aviation industry, because that industry in particular has taken a huge hit. And I think sometimes we need to look at sectors like that and how we can help them. And this APD, just a little bit, will help them a lot.
And there's another thing that I think we can all welcome, and that is a simplification to the alcohol duty regime, which has been massively simplified.
Unless you live in Northern Ireland.
So 3p off a pint is what he said.
True. Yeah.
Comes in 2023. Tax rises come in immediately on tobacco. Huge tobacco increases, by the way, which will increase smuggling massively, particularly for the ham rolling market. But this 3p off a pint will not be realised until 2023. Not quite the drinker's bonanza that we thought it was going to be.
I'll still take it. I'll still take it versus an overcomplicated tax regime that's crippling small brewers and crippling the brewing industry more widely.
It was a good message for low-strength beers.
It's not just beer, it's ciders, fruit ciders. We've seen rosé wine, sparkling wine. It's much bigger than you think. You're just obsessed with beer, Nigel, honestly.
No, I'm not. No, I mean, I'm not. And, of course, gin up and many other things up, fortified wines up, etc.
It's more linked to the actual strength of the spirit, isn't it? Which is, there were some massive discrepancies in the system before.
But I'd like to see the 3p off now, but hey.
Well, I think we all would, to be fair.
But it's just not happening, is it? But no, look, we're going on. We're going on with deficit spending, and he delivered it. Very interesting, I thought. That's a final thought on this from all of us. That night, at 8 o'clock, the night of the budget, Rishi Sunak went to the Crown and Two Chairman, which is a pub in Westminster, which was overflowing with hundreds of people. He doesn't even drink. He wants to be the next leader, doesn't he?
No idea. He claimed not. There was an interview, wasn't there?
I think he's got competition from Liz Truss, though, to be fair.
Well, maybe he does.
Yes, he does.
Paul, very quickly, we're getting short on time. I think he sees himself as the next leader, don't you?
Almost certainly. I think he's definitely on manoeuvres, shall we say.
Yeah. But Liz Truss has suddenly appeared Where does she come from? It's all happened
She's
incredibly
always
quickly.
been there, just folk haven't always recognised her talent.
Well, maybe, Deanna, you are right. You're not running, are you?
Not at this stage.
Just away, that's all.
Fine. Well, look, we're out of time. I hope you enjoyed the show this morning. That's all from us. We'll be back here, of course, next week. Thank you for all your comments, all your views throughout the show. We'll see you next Sunday at 10. But stay right here with us at GB News. Alistair Stewart up next.
With heavy rain clearing to blustery showers. Those blustery showers will already be into southwest England, and some of these could be heavy with a risk of hail and thunder. Very windy with coastal gales, especially further west. The back edge of this morning's heavy rain should clear through London, with brighter skies soon developing. Temperatures around 13 degrees at midday. Lots of blustery showers, heavy at times, will be packing into South Wales by lunchtime. For the Midlands, the morning rain should have cleared and will be in the drier, sunnier slot ahead of the showers feeding in from the west later. Temperatures at lunchtime around 12 Celsius. It'll still be raining across a good part of northeast England at lunchtime, but brighter skies shouldn't be too far away. In the short term, though, watch out for some heavy rain and gusty winds, and it's certainly a wet picture across most of southern and central Scotland. We'll see some heavy and persistent rain, especially over east-facing hills, accompanied by strong and gusty winds. Some showers due in Northern Ireland. Winds will be light with temperatures of 10 or 11 Celsius. Moving into the afternoon, and it will remain wet across northern Scotland, otherwise sunshine and blustery showers, and very windy, especially in the southwest.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panelists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a